Imagine a room buzzing with energy, where the loudest voice demands every eye, every ear. But in the corner, unnoticed, sits someone who feels the undercurrents of every heart in that space. They don't speak, but they know. They don't perform, but they see. This is the empath, and what Master Yi, the modern sage of mindfulness, revealed about their hidden power will unravel everything you thought you knew about strength. Shi Heng Yi taught that within every soul lies a balance of fire and stillness, a dance of compassion and resolve. For empaths, this balance isn't just a concept, it's a battlefield. And when they've been pushed too far, something shifts. Something dangerous. Not because they lash out, but because they awaken. Most people see empaths as soft, overly sensitive, maybe even fragile. They're the ones who cry at a stranger's pain, who sense the unspoken tension in a conversation, who carry the weight of others' emotions as if they were their own. But Master Yi's teachings cut deeper. He described the human psyche as a tapestry of opposites, light woven with shadow, softness tempered by steel. Empaths, he said, are masters of this tapestry, not because they choose to be, but because life forces them to confront it. They feel everything, yes, but they also learn to navigate the chaos of human emotions with a precision most can't fathom. Here's where it gets gripping. Shi Yi spoke of a state called inner alignment, where the heart and mind synchronize after years of enduring betrayal, manipulation, or neglect. Empaths, by their nature, absorb the world's pain, but they also catalog it. Every slight, every lie, every moment of being used, it's not forgotten. It's processed. It's stored. Not as resentment, but as clarity. Master Yi likened this to a warrior sharpening their blade in silence, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The empath doesn't break under pressure, they refine. Narcissists, those who thrive on control and admiration, make a fatal mistake here. They see the empath's kindness as a weakness, their patience as an invitation. They think they can push, prod, and manipulate without consequence. But Shi Heng Yi warned that the most dangerous force isn't the one that shouts, it's the one that observes, learns, and chooses when to act. The empath's silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. Their compassion isn't naivety, it's a choice. And when that choice shifts, when the empath decides they've had enough, the narcissist doesn't see it coming. Master Yi's philosophy emphasizes conscious presence, the ability to hold space for both joy and pain without being consumed by either. Empaths embody this, but betrayal accelerates their journey toward it. The pain of being used, dismissed, or devalued becomes a crucible. It burns away their illusions, forcing them to confront not just the darkness in others, but the untapped strength within themselves. This is what Shi Yi called the awakening of the inner warrior. It's not about becoming cold or cruel, it's about becoming clear. What happens when an empath, forged in this fire, stops absorbing and starts reflecting? They don't just mirror back emotions, they reveal truths. They see through the narcissist's charm, the gaslighter's deflections, the manipulator's half-truths. And they don't just see, they act. Not with vengeance, but with precision. Master Yi described this as the power of aligned action. The empath doesn't need to shout or destroy to win. They simply stop playing a game rigged against them. And that, according to Shi Heng Yi, is when the real danger begins, not for the empath, but for the one who underestimated them. The empath's journey isn't one of comfort, it's a forge. Shi Heng Yi, in his teachings on resilience, spoke of life as a series of tests, each one shaping the soul like a blade under a hammer. For the empath, these tests often come in the form of betrayal, those moments when their trust, their openness, their willingness to see the good in others is weaponized against them. But here's where Master Yi's wisdom flips the script. What the narcissist sees as a victory, the empath transforms into a catalyst. This is where the quiet storm gathers force. Picture an empath who's been through the ringer, lied to, manipulated, drained by someone who thrives on their light. They've given second chances, third chances, maybe even 10th chances, because their heart believes in redemption. But Shi Yi taught that every heart has a limit, not of love, but of tolerance. When that limit is reached, something profound happens. Master Yi called it the turning of the tide, a moment when the empath's inner world shifts from accommodation to sovereignty. They don't stop feeling, they start choosing. This choice is what makes them dangerous. Not in a destructive sense, but in a way that upends every power dynamic. Shi Heng Yi described the psyche as a house with many rooms, some lit, some shadowed. Empaths, by nature, explore these rooms deeply, learning the contours of their own pain and potential. Betrayal forces them to open doors they might have avoided, the ones hiding their anger, their boundaries, their capacity to say, no more. And when they do, they don't just find weakness, they uncover strength. Master Yi's concept of aligned strength is key here. Unlike the narcissist, whose strength is performative, rooted in control and external validation, the empath's power is internal, forged through self-awareness. They've felt the sting of manipulation so often that they've become experts in decoding it. Every gaslighting tactic, every half-hearted apology, every subtle jab, it's all data. Shi Yi likened this to a martial artist studying an opponent's moves. The empath doesn't just absorb the blow, they learn its rhythm, its intent, its flaws. And when they've seen enough, they stop reacting and start responding. This shift is what the narcissist never sees coming. They rely on the empath's predictability, their need to explain, to fix, to keep the peace. But when an empath integrates what Master Yi called their inner warrior, they become unpredictable. Not erratic, but deliberate. They don't argue with someone who thrives on conflict, they walk away. They don't beg for respect, they demand it by their absence. They don't chase, they choose. Shi Heng Yi emphasized that true power lies in this choice, the ability to act from clarity, not compulsion. What's chilling is how this transformation unfolds silently. The empath doesn't announce their awakening. There's no grand confrontation, no dramatic showdown. Instead, there's a quiet recalibration. Shi Yi spoke of stillness as strength, the ability to stand firm without needing to prove anything. The empath, once a wellspring of endless giving, becomes a fortress of selective care. They don't stop loving, they start protecting. They don't stop understanding, they start discerning. And this discernment, Master Yi taught, is sharper than any sword. The narcissist, blind to this shift, continues their games, expecting the same pliable empath. But the ground has changed beneath them. The empath, now awake, sees through the facade with a clarity that feels almost supernatural. Shi Heng Yi called this the vision of the heart, a state where emotional intelligence becomes a lens for truth. And when an empath wields this truth, it's not just disarming, it's devastating. Not because they seek to destroy, but because they refuse to be destroyed. The empath's transformation isn't loud, it's seismic. Shi Heng Yi, in his teachings on inner mastery, spoke of pain as a teacher, not a punisher. For the empath, every betrayal, every moment of being taken for granted, becomes raw material in an alchemical process. They don't just endure suffering, they transmute it. What emerges isn't bitterness, but a refined strength that the narcissist can't comprehend. Master Yi described this as the forging of the soul, where the fire of hardship doesn't destroy, it purifies. Consider the empath who's been pushed to their breaking point. They've absorbed the narcissist's deflections, weathered their blame, and carried the weight of their chaos. But Shi Yi taught that within every wound lies a seed of awakening. The empath's pain isn't a dead end, it's a doorway. Through it, they confront what Master Yi called the shadow within, the parts of themselves they've suppressed to keep the peace. Their fear of conflict. Their reluctance to set boundaries. Their hesitation to claim their own power. Betrayal forces them to face these shadows, not as enemies, but as allies. This is where the narcissist's miscalculation becomes fatal. They mistake the empath's silence for submission, their forgiveness for fragility. But Shi Heng Yi emphasized that true strength isn't in resisting pain, it's in integrating it. The empath doesn't just heal from betrayal, they grow from it. They learn to recognize patterns, the subtle cues of manipulation, the flicker of insincerity in a smile, the hollowness in a promise. Master Yi likened this to a warrior reading the battlefield, seeing moves before they're made. The empath's sensitivity, once a vulnerability, becomes their greatest weapon. What happens next is what Shi Yi called the pivot of presence. The empath stops being a sponge for others' emotions and starts becoming a mirror. They don't absorb dysfunction anymore, they reflect it. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Master Yi taught that this reflection isn't about cruelty, it's about truth. When the narcissist tries their usual tactics, charm, guilt, or gaslighting, the empath doesn't flinch. They see the game for what it is, and they choose not to play. This refusal, Shi Heng Yi said, is more powerful than any argument. It's the power of standing still in your truth. This stillness terrifies the narcissist. They thrive on reaction, on pulling others into their orbit. But the empath, now awake, operates from what Master Yi called centered action. They don't need to prove they're right, their actions do that. They don't need to explain their worth, their boundaries speak for them. They don't need to chase validation, they've found it within. Shi Yi described this as the strength of the rooted tree, unmoved by the storm because its roots run deep. The empath's roots are their hard-earned wisdom, grown from every moment they were underestimated. Here's where the psychology gets riveting. Shi Heng Yi spoke of the balance of opposites, the ability to hold compassion and resolve in equal measure. The awakened empath embodies this. They don't stop caring, they start choosing who deserves their care. They don't stop feeling, they start directing their emotions with intention. This balance makes them untouchable. The narcissist, who banks on emotional chaos, finds themselves facing someone who is no longer swayed by it. Master Yi called this the calm within the storm, a state where the empath's emotional intelligence becomes a shield and a sword. The narcissist's world begins to unravel here. They're used to controlling the narrative, but the empath, now aligned, rewrites it. Not through confrontation, but through detachment. Shi Yi taught that detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. The empath doesn't withdraw because they're weak, they step back because they see. And what they see, with a precision honed by pain, is the truth the narcissist can't face. Their tactics no longer work. The awakened empath doesn't just survive betrayal, they transcend it. Shi Heng Yi, in his teachings on mindfulness, spoke of the clarity of the still mind, a state where emotions no longer cloud judgment but sharpen it. For the empath, this clarity is their superpower. They've walked through the fire of manipulation, felt the sting of deceit, and emerged not with a hardened heart, but with a discerning one. Master Yi described this as seeing with the soul, a vision so precise it dismantles the narcissist's illusions without a single word. This discernment is what makes the empath dangerous, not in a vengeful way, but in a way that shifts the entire dynamic. The narcissist thrives on ambiguity, weaving webs of half-truths and emotional traps. But the empath, forged by their trials, sees through these with a lucidity that feels almost otherworldly. Shi Yi taught that true power lies in knowing without being swayed. The empath doesn't just sense the narcissist's tactics, they understand their intent, their patterns, their endgame. And they choose not to engage. This choice is revolutionary. Master Yi emphasized that the greatest battles are won not through force, but through refusal to be pulled into someone else's chaos. The empath, once a willing participant in the narcissist's drama, becomes a silent observer. They don't argue or plead, they simply act. Shi Heng Yi called this the action of non-action, a paradox where doing nothing becomes the most powerful move. When the narcissist expects a reaction, anger, tears, or desperation, they get silence. And that silence, Master Yi said, is louder than any scream. Here's where it gets profound. The empath's discernment doesn't just protect them, it exposes. Shi Yi spoke of the mirror of truth, where the empath's presence alone forces others to confront their own shadows. The narcissist, who relies on projection and denial, can't stand this reflection. Every time they try to manipulate, the empath's calm clarity reflects their tactics back like a spotlight. Not with malice, but with honesty. Master Yi taught that truth, wielded consciously, is the most disarming force. The empath doesn't need to attack, their awareness is enough. This awareness rewrites the rules. The narcissist expects the empath to chase, to explain, to beg for understanding. But the awakened empath, guided by what Shi Heng Yi called inner sovereignty, no longer plays that game. They set boundaries with the precision of a master swordsman, swift, clean, and unshakable. They don't negotiate with those who thrive on distortion. They don't pour their energy into black holes. Master Yi likened this to guarding the temple of the self, where the empath's heart becomes sacred ground, accessible only to those who honor it. What's fascinating is how this shift happens internally. Shi Heng Yi described the process as the integration of the warrior and the sage. The empath doesn't lose their compassion, they refine it. They don't abandon their sensitivity, they weaponize it, not to harm, but to protect. Their emotional intelligence, once a source of vulnerability, becomes a strategic tool. They can read a room, sense a lie, or detect a hidden agenda with an accuracy that feels almost prophetic. Master Yi called this the wisdom of the heart, a blend of intuition and experience that makes the empath untouchable. The narcissist, sensing this shift, panics. Their usual tools, guilt, charm, or deflection, fall flat. The empath's discernment cuts through their facade like a blade through mist. Shi Heng Yi taught that the most powerful stance is one of inner alignment, where actions flow from clarity, not reaction. The empath, now aligned, doesn't need to prove their worth. They live it. And that, Master Yi said, is what makes them a force the narcissist never saw coming, a force that doesn't fight, but simply is. The empath's transformation reaches its peak when they become what Shi Heng Yi called the unshakable core. This isn't about becoming untouchable in a cold, distant way, it's about standing so firmly in their truth that no manipulation can sway them. Master Yi taught that the greatest strength isn't in overpowering others, but in mastering oneself. For the empath, this mastery is born from the ashes of betrayal, where every wound has been studied, every lesson internalized. The narcissist, who thrives on control, finds themselves facing a force they can't bend. Shi Heng Yi described this state as the center of the storm, where the empath's inner world becomes a sanctuary of clarity. They've walked through the chaos of being used, dismissed, or devalued, and instead of breaking, they've built something stronger. This strength isn't loud or aggressive, it's quiet, resolute, absolute. The empath no longer seeks approval or validation from those who don't see their worth. Master Yi called this the liberation of the self, a state where external opinions lose their grip, and the empath's truth becomes their compass. What makes this dangerous for the narcissist is how it dismantles their playbook. Narcissists rely on emotional triggers, guilt, fear, or the need to please. But the empath, now centered, is immune. Shi Heng Yi spoke of the power of non-attachment, not as apathy, but as freedom from needing others to define you. The empath doesn't retreat from relationships, they redefine them. They engage only where there's mutual respect, reciprocity, and genuine connection. Anyone who offers less is met with a boundary as solid as stone. This boundary setting is where the empath's power shines. Master Yi taught that boundaries aren't walls to keep others out, they're gates that protect what's sacred. The empath, once hesitant to say no, now wields it with precision. They don't explain or justify, they simply decide. Shi Heng Yi likened this to a river carving its path, steady, unstoppable, shaping the world around it without force. The narcissist, expecting the empath to bend, finds themselves facing someone who no longer negotiates their worth. Here's where the psychology deepens. Shi Heng Yi described the empath's journey as the path of integration, where they embrace both their light and their shadow. The shadow isn't just their pain or anger, it's their untapped power, their ability to stand firm, to walk away, to choose themselves. Betrayal forces them to claim this shadow, not as darkness, but as strength. The empath doesn't become less compassionate, they become more discerning. They don't stop loving, they start loving wisely. Master E called this the balance of heart and will, a harmony that makes them formidable. The narcissist, sensing this shift, doubles down, trying to provoke a reaction. But the empath's unshakable core renders their tactics obsolete. Shi Heng Yi taught that true power lies in choosing your response, not reacting from pain or impulse. The empath, now awake, responds with clarity, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a single, unwavering, no. This response isn't emotional, it's strategic. It's the culmination of every lesson learned, every boundary forged, every truth uncovered. The narcissist, who feeds on chaos, starves in the face of this calm. What's breathtaking is how this transformation radiates. The empath's presence alone becomes a mirror, reflecting not just the narcissist's tactics, but their insecurities, their need for control. Shi Heng Yi called this the reflection of truth, where the empath's clarity forces others to confront themselves. They don't need to fight or destroy, their existence is enough. Master E said, the one who knows themselves cannot be moved. The empath, fully awake, embodies this. They've become a force not of destruction, but of undeniable truth, a truth the narcissist can neither manipulate nor escape. The journey of the empath culminates in what Shi Heng Yi called the sovereign self, a state of complete inner authority. This isn't about dominance over others, it's about mastery over one's own heart, mind, and spirit. The empath, once a vessel for others' pain, becomes a beacon of their own truth. Master E taught that sovereignty is the ultimate liberation, where the soul no longer seeks completion from the outside world. For the empath, this is both a revolution and a revelation, and it's what makes them untouchable. Shi Heng Yi described sovereignty as standing in your own light. The empath, forged by betrayal and refined by wisdom, no longer chases approval or fears rejection. They've learned their worth isn't negotiable, their boundaries aren't debatable, and their love is a gift, not an obligation. This shift is seismic. The narcissist, who thrives on exploiting dependency, finds themselves powerless against someone who needs nothing from them. Master E called this the freedom of wholeness, where the empath becomes complete unto themselves. What's mesmerizing is how this sovereignty manifests. The empath doesn't shut out the world, they choose their place in it with intention. Shi Heng Yi spoke of conscious engagement, where every relationship, every interaction, is a deliberate choice rooted in mutual respect. The empath no longer rescues those who revel in their own chaos. They don't chase those who run from accountability. They don't pour their light into voids. Instead, they invest their energy where it's honored, creating connections that are as deep as they are discerning. This discernment is the empath's final weapon. Master E taught that true power lies in seeing without illusion. The sovereign empath sees people as they are, not as they wish to be seen. They recognize the narcissist's charm as a mask, their apologies as tactics, their promises as traps. But they don't react with anger or bitterness, they respond with clarity. Shi Heng Yi likened this to the stillness of a clear lake, reflecting reality without distortion. The narcissist, confronted by this reflection, is forced to face their own emptiness, and that's a battle they can't win. Here's the paradox that makes the empath truly dangerous: their strength is rooted in their sensitivity. Shi Heng Yi emphasized that the heart that feels deeply is the heart that sees clearly. The empath's emotional intelligence, once a source of vulnerability, becomes their greatest asset. They don't just understand emotions, they navigate them with the precision of a master. They know when to stay, when to leave, when to speak, and when to stay silent. This mastery, Master E said, is the art of being, where every action flows from a place of inner truth. The narcissist's downfall lies in their inability to comprehend this. They mistake the empath's quiet for weakness, their forgiveness for surrender. But the sovereign empath, as Shi Heng Yi taught, has transcended the need for external battles. They've won the war within themselves. They don't seek revenge because they've outgrown the need for it. They don't need to prove their strength because they live it. Master E called this the victory of presence, where simply being authentic is enough to shift the world around you. In the end, the empath's journey is what Shi Heng Yi described as the path to becoming a force of nature. Not destructive, but unstoppable. Not aggressive, but certain. They are dangerous not because they harm, but because they cannot be controlled, manipulated, or broken. Their wounds have become wisdom, their pain has become power, and their heart has become a fortress. The narcissist, who underestimated them, learns too late what Master Yi knew all along. The awakened empath, fully sovereign, is the most formidable force of all, because they've learned to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others.